James Bond is hardly a stranger to TV screens. A lot of 007 fans probably had their first experiences with the films watching them on a TV screen, whether a broadcast or on a streaming service, on VHS, DVD, what have you, and TV has always been a key promotional tool for the series. Obviously, TV spots and trailers during ad breaks, but more interestingly for Bond fans, are the many number of TV specials that crop up every time a new Bond film is gearing up for a cinematic release. The Incredible World of James Bond, Welcome to Japan, Mr. Bond, Happy Anniversary 007, and Best Ever Bond, just to name a few. And yet, despite this decades-long association with television, there has only ever been one official James Bond TV series, and it's one that Eon Productions seem like they really want to forget.
Bond. James Bond Jr.
Until now, at least, 007 Road to a Million launched on Amazon Prime Video on November 10th, 2023. It is a reality game show featuring a bunch of pairs who are put through a variety of tasks, like climbing a crane, scuba diving, measuring a snake, and so on, in order to acquire a briefcase which will contain a multiple-choice question. If they get the question right, they bank X amount of money and move on to the next task. If they get it wrong, then they're out of the show. Some structure is provided to the episodes by Brian Cox, who is here in character as the Controller, and the premise is that he's a Bond villain type who has set up all of these challenges and is putting the contestants through their paces for his own sadistic pleasure reasons, I guess. We'll talk about it. The whole show is presented in a very glossy, very high-end, very cinematic fashion. They were clearly working with some very high-quality cameras, and there's clearly a high standard of production quality at play here, which feels totally appropriate for a game show spawned from a man who likes the finer things in life. Good evening, Mr. Bond fans. The 007 brand extends into so many elements of media and product that I really shouldn't be so surprised that we now have a 007 branded reality show. And yet, even after having watched the whole thing, it feels so strange to describe this show to people. I'm like, how the hell is this thing real? But before going into my thoughts about the show, I just want to talk a little bit about why we even have this series. I don't think I'm the only one who found the announcement of it a little surprising and very much outside of the usual Bond wheelhouse. Well, I think a big part of the reasoning for why we have it is that for a few years now, streaming services have been pumping a lot of resources into unscripted reality series, and now that Amazon owns MGM and therefore a stake in James Bond, I would imagine that Prime executives would be chomping at the bit for new 007 branded anything. Eon Productions have made it very clear that they make films for the cinema first and foremost, and they aren't interested in scripted TV shows at this time, so I don't think that we'll be getting the Young M or the Bill Tanner spin-off series anytime soon. I would imagine that Road to a Million was something that all parties could get on board with. It's a relatively low-risk endeavor, both financially and brand-wise, when compared with developing and making a scripted series. My theory about this series being something of an Eon olive branch to Amazon is slightly scuppered by the fact that apparently this show was in development before the Amazon MGM deal was even finalized. A Variety article reporting on the series Greenlight mentions that sources say that the project had been in the works at Prime Video for around 4 years, which is interesting to note, though I'm sure that the finalized deal helped make up any wavering executives' minds as to whether or not the series should indeed go ahead. I bring this stuff up because I think it is a bit of corporate synergy in an attempt to fulfill certain content quotas that has led this show to our screens. Like I say, streaming services want unscripted. You can have many hours of content for less of the cost of a scripted series, and for Bond, it's something keeping the brand in the public consciousness during this extended hiatus where nothing seems to be moving on the feature film front. So, as much as Road to a Million feels like a concept designed by an algorithm to me, I can see why it exists, I guess. Okay, so moving on to my own reactions to the show. First of all, I think I need to lay out my reality TV credentials. I would never describe myself as an ardent reality TV viewer, and yet there are some series that I dip in and out of. I watch The Great British Bake Off regularly every year, though I think that probably speaks more to my love of cakes than reality television. I am also quite partial to a tea time quiz show every once in a while. Look, I'm only bringing this stuff up because I want to give you some context regarding where I'm coming to this show from, and also just to say that I'm not gonna get snobby about this. Like, I do occasionally watch reality TV. I am not someone who thinks that this is detrimental to the quality of the brand. I mean, over the years, 007 has slapped its, branding on an awful lot of products, and I do not think that this is about to tank the prestige of the brand in the minds of the general public. Though based on my own experiences with reality television, I was immediately a bit surprised by the fact that 007 Road to a Million is presented in a non-linear format. We are hastily introduced to 9 pairs of people in the first episode, but we only really focus on a couple of the pairs in that first episode as they go about completing tasks in Scotland. Lots of Skyfall-esque scenery here, and one of the main challenges involves the contestants wading through some cold water to secure the briefcases, which I guess is referencing Bond going into the frozen lake in Skyfall, or maybe I'm just extrapolating a bit too much. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting creative choice that they were only going to focus on a limited number of the pairs per episode, and also that they were going to kind of dart about all over the place location-wise. Like, I'm used to, just again to go to Bake Off, I'm gonna be craving cake so much after I record this video. On that show, you have all of the contestants there, and in week 1, it's cake week, and everyone has to make a cake, and in week 2, it's bread week, and everyone has to make bread, and as the series goes on, you lose a contestant each week, and they don't progress through to the next round. Here, it kind of goes all over the place, so there are some couples that are technically ahead of the other ones, and I was surprised about that because I thought, like, okay, week 1, this is the Scotland week, I guess, and everyone's going to be doing these challenges, and then someone will be knocked out. The next week it'll be Italy week, Rio week, and so on. I felt that what this ended up doing, though, was depriving the series of a sense of momentum, because there are other couples that are, like, progressing through the countries, and they're on, like, you know, their 3rd country by, you know, episode 5, and then in episode 5, at one point, they cut back to another couple who are still in Scotland, like, doing the wading into the water and answering the first question thing. So it was a bit, I found it a bit choppy in terms of how this was all being presented. On the flip side, though, it does create a sense of globe hopping. Like, it can be quite exciting that there are all of these pairs in different places, and much like Bond films, how they will jump about locations, this series does that as well. So it makes it less predictable in a way, and, you know, episode to episode, I had no idea which couples were going to be the focus. That being said, though, this show at times felt like there's this pair of brothers who are referred to as the Bone Brothers. They focus on them so much that at times this show felt like the Bone Brothers and Friends. They focus on them an awful lot, and fair enough, they seem like really nice guys. They're very funny. London born and bred. I quite liked them as screen presences, but I'm sure that if you went through the series tallying everyone's, you know, number of, you know, percentage screen time, what have you, they would come out on top by a significant margin, and I thought that that was an interesting choice. They also seem to have some of the kind of nicer things to do. At one point, they are just at GoldenEye and chilling, and there's a bit of a gag about, like, oh, they're having a nice relax, and then they get the call and they have to go and do the challenge. But that felt like a lot more luxury than some of the pairs get. I thought that it felt weird for a show like this to basically kind of say, okay, these two are our stars and everyone else is a supporting player, which is what it felt like to me, because, like, you could just tell by how much they were focusing on them in the first few episodes that, like, oh, okay, I guess I should be expecting them to go quite far in this, because you're giving them so much more backstory and screen time than anyone else. The tasks that the couples have to perform over the course of the series increase in scale, and most of them are Bond-inspired. So there's cranes to climb, like he did in Casino Royale, there's cable cars to clamber on, like he did in Moonraker and stuff, and I was left quite underwhelmed with the things that they had to do in the first couple of episodes as a result of this kind of increase in scale. I thought from episode 3 onwards there was some fairly entertaining challenges, big scale stuff that was genuinely impressive, so it's a shame that so much of the first episode is just like people trudging around the Scottish Highlands going, oh look, a sheep. Oh yeah, that's a sheep, that. Yeah, sheep. And then having to wade waist high into some cold water. It's not the most exciting of starts. And I get that they want to create a sense of escalation. You want to get the sense that the challenges are getting more and more difficult and what have you. But as a result of that, as a result of starting in such a low-key way, I was bored out of my brain for those first 2 episodes. From episode 3 onwards, I thought things picked up and I was having a bit of a more fun time with it, but those first couple of episodes, that first episode in particular, is rough. If I weren't a obsessive Bond completist, I wouldn't have continued watching this past episode 2. But now, I mean, hey, I read all those friggin' John Gardner books. I can endure anything if it's got Bond slapped on the front of it. And also, because they've structured the show the way that they have, despite saying, oh, it's about 9 pairs of people, there's only, I would say, 4 out of 9 that actually matter. Like, the rest they simply kind of brush over, which is weird, because some of the contestants do make it through multiple rounds. They're not all just people who fail at the first hurdle and then, right, that's it, they're out of the competition. Like, some people do get to go to, like, some other countries and get to other levels of the show, and then all they get is, like, a couple of minutes, like, rushed through, which is, I thought, a bit odd. If they went to the effort of filming these people, presumably they have stuff about their backstories and whatever, but in editing they've clearly decided that they're only going to focus on a select few. Of the 4 pairs that they do focus on, there's the brothers that I mentioned, there's a father and son, a husband and wife, and then 2 friends. And they all seem like really nice, down-to-earth people. They have not cast, in this show, reality TV wannabe stars. They have not cast attention-seeking influencers or anything like that, which I think is really helpful when it comes to creating a bit more of a down-to-earth, but also kind of premium feel about this. I mean, they're not throwing these people into the situation hoping that they're going to get into arguments and they're going to have fights and things like that. It's not about that. It is genuinely about just taking real people and seeing how they cope in these incredible situations. The question and answer component of the format, though, I don't know if I really gelled with. First of all, some of the Q&A seemed much easier than others, to a painful extent. In that first episode, a pair of them spent about 5 minutes deliberating over which Scottish king Shakespeare wrote about, and it's multiple choice as well, so Macbeth is right there. And another question that they get is on the tasting notes of rum, and they actually are given a bottle of rum to, like, smell and taste and everything, so I thought that it was pretty damned easy to work out, particularly on a multiple choice question basis, what the answer to those questions were gonna be. It's also perhaps slightly surprising that none of these contestants are presented as Bond fans, or indeed seem to be even aware that they're on a James Bond themed game show. The locations that some of them are in, you know, they see some cars from the films and props, and, you know, there's names referencing things from the films, and all of the references seem to completely fly over their heads. But I understand why the producers have done this, because they want this show to be very mass appeal, and they don't just want it to be about a bunch of Bond nerds like me, who have seen Moonraker 300 times, rocking up at the cable car and being like, did you know that in 1979 Roger Moore climbed up on here and had a fight with Jaws? They don't want that as much as I would love and prefer that. They clearly think that having people on this that do have more of a knowledge of Bond would be off-putting for more casual fans of the series, and yeah, they probably are making this for the kinds of people who, you know, probably go to the cinema when a new Bond film is out, but don't know them particularly. They might catch one on TV or on a streaming service every once in a while. If you are a big Bond fan, though, you will notice names, cars, locations, and elements that are from the films scattered throughout the series. There's also a lot of Bond music in the score, mainly from the Craig era, and I guess that's enough to quantify this as a James Bond series, but it's so in the background and also quite random that it has, like, little to no bearing on what the contestants are actually doing. They'll just be in a garage, and the Rolls Royce from Goldfinger will just be there, and they say, oh, that's a Rolls Royce, that, yeah, Rolls Royce. And then, but the car that we're driving is over here. As such, it's quite weird, because it feels like this is a Bond show that is embarrassed that it is a Bond show. And I'm not saying that I wanted every question and answer to be Bond related. I'm not saying that I wanted to be inundated with facts about the locations and the cars or whatever, but it feels like a game show with a couple of Bond flourishes rather than a full-on Bond game show. So while we're watching all of the pairs doing what they do, we occasionally will cut to Brian Cox, who is the controller, and we'll have close-ups of him going like, and saying things like, oh, I can't wait to put these two through the ringer. So the point of this character from the promotional material that I've read, I don't think any of this is in the show, but he is a cultured villain who apparently revels in the increasingly difficult journey and questions the contestants must overcome. Now, I love Brian Cox. I have loved this actor for many years. I love Succession. It's one of my favourite TV shows ever made, and yet I was a big fan of him even before that, like, Manhunter, Red Eye, X-Men 2, Troy, the Bourne films, just everything that he is in. Like, he's just one of those actors who I never think he gives a bad performance in anything that he's been in. He might be in bad things, but he's never bad in them. I love this guy. I think he's a great actor. I think he has a very magnetic screen presence. And if anyone had to be here as the controller, I'm glad it's him. But just as a wraparound device for an unscripted series, which is what his segments are all about, it felt a little tacked on to me. First of all, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think any contestant on the show ever actually refers to him as the controller. They will receive telephone calls and whatnot, which are from him. It's his voice, but I assume that that's dubbed in afterwards, and while they were actually on the location filming, it's just anyone's voice on the phone telling them to walk across the Scottish Highlands or whatever. I suspect that based on the announcements of like when they were going to be filming the series, and then when Brian Cox was cast in the series, which was a few months after, I believe it was a few months after they were actually out filming this. So I remember on some of the contestant applications, because I did look at it, I never applied for this, but on some of the, if you apply for this, you need to make yourself available at certain times, in these months or whatever, and then I remember that Brian Cox's announcement came a good few months after they were supposedly filming this thing. So I think there's a good chance that when they were filming the unscripted bits, they didn't have a wraparound segment in place. They were just, it's going to be a voice on the phone and we don't quite know what it's going to be. And to be fair, there are multiple ways that they could have played this. I would have thought that the most obvious way to structure a show where you're sort of like, can real people put themselves, test the limits of what James Bond can do? I would have thought that in that kind of scenario, it would have made more sense for the person on the phone to be M, or someone from MI6 or something, and they're giving you missions and kind of trying to help you out more than anything else, because at the end of the day, the contestants are getting money. The controller, on the other hand, is played as a villainous figure, and he is supposedly taking a sadistic pleasure in watching the contestants undergo these challenges, but it didn't really gel for me, and I spent a good few episodes just wondering, like, what is this guy's problem with these people? Why is he making them do this? Brian Cox could totally do a proper cinematic Bond villain, but the controller himself is the kind of villain that I think Bond would probably quite enjoy to go up against in one of the films. He's just like, oh, what? You mean I just have to, like, climb up a hill and I get 50 grand for it? Great. So I'm going to get into a few spoilers from this point on, because I do want to just touch on how this show ends, because I was pretty annoyed by that. But yes, spoilers from this point on, so if you do have a few episodes left to go, or you want to remain unspoiled for how it ends, then please do revisit this video after you have done so. So I think that the fact that they don't have the pairs of people competing against each other is problematic, in the sense that if everyone fails, they just fail, and that's the end of the show, apparently, and as a result, you don't have a climax. No player comes within, reaching distance of the £1 million prize, which is in the title of the show. It's the whole point of this thing. Obviously, by the time it came to the last 5 minutes of the last episode, and there's, the last remaining pair answering a question, I'm like, well, I guess they're not going to get this right, because we've only got 5 minutes left, unless they're going to really rush through the next few steps. So as a result, the whole thing ends on a bit of a downer, and I found it lacking in a lot of tension or suspense in that last episode, because I'm like, are they really going to do it all in this 1 hour? And sure enough, they don't. Whereas I think if you had the pairs of people competing against each other, you could structure the thing in such a way that, the players who fail the question are put into a pool together and they have to do something to compete against each other, and then whoever comes last is knocked out. So you would actually inevitably get a pair making it through to the £1 million question. So you could keep some tension going until the very end, and then sure enough, are they gonna stay on $500,000 or whatever the second prize is, or are they gonna get up to $1 million? But it's a little weird as well, because the contestants never actually meet each other on screen. I mean, maybe they would have done at the very, very end if they'd have all have made it to the £1 million question. There are a couple of bits in the last couple of episodes where they edit it to make it seem like they're all in the same space at the same time. They're all in that, casino party outside. They're all by that locker in the town at in the final place where they get their winnings from. And yet I don't think they were actually filming on the same day. I think that it's just edited that way, and as a result, they all feel really detached from each other, which I think is a shame. They're all kind of just isolated in their pairs, and it might have been a bit more interesting and, felt a bit more competitive, really, if they were going against each other in certain tasks. Like, there's that shooting task in the very last episode, and only one pair wins and gets through, whereas if they were competing against each other, maybe you see, who can do it the quickest and the slowest is eliminated from the contest. You could do something like that, but maybe that'd be too mean-spirited for what the producers are going for with this show. I don't know. So just one more thing. In a series full of random Bond stuff, really strangely, they got the card dealer from Casino Royale to make an appearance in the very last episode. And they kind of make nothing of it. They don't draw attention to it. It's kind of like, if you know, you know. He just comes in, says one thing, and then leaves. And it was like, oh, okay, that's interesting that they went to the effort of doing that. I don't know, it's weird that again, with the cars, they have to, presumably transport this Rolls Royce and the, Hinks's burnt out car from Spectre to these garages in the middle of Scotland. I can't imagine that things like that would be cheap, and yet, is that really worth doing for maybe a minority of the people watching the show to just be like, I understand that reference. I would have thought that if you were going to bring in Bond flourishers, you would want them to actually matter and not just be background detail. So to wrap up, did I have a good time with Road to a Million? Well, I have lots of notes on it. We've been through a lot of them in this video. I think that they could certainly improve on this format for a second series. This felt very much like a first draft to me, a pretty good looking first draft, but I don't think that the format is quite there yet. I don't think that the Bond elements are quite there yet. I think maybe they need to just lean more into the spy side of things. Maybe it would have been much more of a success then, because the contestants aren't really doing anything terribly spy related. It's a lot of physical challenges, which is cool, but I think what I basically would kind of like them to be in is essentially a big secret cinema kind of scenario. If anyone's ever been to one of those, they're kind of these immersive events. They did one for Casino Royale that I went to twice and I had a fantastic time. But you go in, and on the first time that I was there, I didn't really know what was going on, so I didn't get terribly involved with stuff, but just observing a few things, I went back a second time, and I threw myself into it completely. And it was great fun, because they have the whole venue. It's this huge warehouse, or it was a huge warehouse just outside of London, and they had bits set up, so it was kind of one room was the Venice room, and then they had an airport, and, there's so much stuff going on. And then there are actors there placed in the crowd who will give you tasks to do and stuff. And I got on this really fun. I saw the actor who I knew was playing Mr. White, and I went over to him, and I was like, Mr. White, I presume. And then I kind of got in on that particular strand of the story. And it was so much fun, because Mr. White, took me to meet with Yusuf Kabira, and I had to, be his ally as he was, and for literally, 10, 15 minutes of this, this event, everything's happening around, and I'm just following this one guy around, and he's taking me to a phone, and he's saying, you need to say this into the phone, and he was holding up little bits of paper that I had to, say into the phone, and it was really good and fun, and I do wonder if this series just needs to be a bit more like that, so it isn't just, one physical challenge, and then one question that they're going to spend deliberating, 5-10 minutes deliberating over. You actually have them on a bit more of an Easter egg hunt, maybe. And they do that in a few places. They do go to bars and restaurants, and they have to sort of, ask local people where to go and stuff. Oh, actually, that's one more thing. Just on the costume design for this thing. I can only assume that the contestants were kitted out, because everyone's wearing very nice clothes throughout so much of this, and I was like, is that their actual wardrobe, or is this, are these Bond brands that they're wearing? But even down to some extras, there is a guy in, I think it's the Bone Brothers, they're in Jamaica, and they have a boat. He's presented as a local who has a boat, and he's going to drive them to a certain place, but he was dressed exactly like Quarrel in Doctor No, with the bright red t-shirt, and I was like, this can't be a coincidence. He can't just so happen to be wearing these clothes. Like, they must have dressed him up like that as some kind of reference. But yeah, I thought, again, very strange. So anyway, back to my thoughts on the series. I really went off on a tangent there. I had a fine time watching it. I thought it was acceptable entertainment, acceptable content for, a few hours. I think there's a lot of room to improve. I thought the first 2 episodes were agonizingly dull, and I thought it was weird just which contestants they were choosing to focus so much attention on. It's kind of hard to recommend this to ardent Bond fans because I don't think it's made for us. For a more general audience, yeah, probably, but then I don't think a more general audience would watch a video where I spend, 20 minutes, half an hour talking about this series, so you might have some fun. It might be something worth having on in the background while you're doing something else and seeing how you gel with it, because, like I said, I mean, they spend so long in between the physical challenges and the questions that I was sort of looking at my phone every now and then because it was just like, deliberating over this really obvious question. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. I suppose I've just got a very, shrug attitude towards this thing. Like I say, I don't think that it's doing a terrible disservice to the brand. I've quite enjoyed. I live in London, and it's quite nice to walk down the street and see 007 plastered on the side of buses. They've really been giving this thing a big promotional push, and when I've been on Amazon Prime for the last couple of weeks, watching the thing, it's there in number 1, 2, 3 in the top most watched shows in the UK. So I guess it's doing well. I guess we're getting a second series. Who knows what that'll look like? If it'll be the same or if they'll retool it a bit. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comment section below. And also, please consider clicking the subscribe button and the Mrs. Bell notification button. There's links to my various social media pages there as well, so please do follow me on those platforms if you care to do so. And with all that being said, and until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.